Beyond the daily headlines and the battlefield reports, something else is happening. It's happening quietly, behind the scenes, in strategy rooms and on secure phone lines from Washington to Brussels. A quiet but incredibly significant crisis is taking shape, and it's all centered on Ukraine's peace plan.
Let's unpack this quote because it really gets to the heart of the matter. What started as a proposal, a framework for ending the war, has now morphed into something much bigger. It's become a high-stakes stress test for the world's major powers, revealing just how deep the competing interests and strategic pressures really go. To truly understand this moment, we have to look past the surface. This isn't just about what Ukraine is demanding in its 10 points. Fundamentally, this is about what the international community, the key global players, is actually willing or even able to accept.
And that brings us to the core conflict. On one side, you have the principles of the peace plan, which are clear and aspirational. But on the other, you have the hard red lines, the geopolitical constraints, and the cold military calculations of the powers involved. You have to remember, behind every diplomatic statement, there is a military calculation.
At first glance, Ukraine's official peace plan seems pretty straightforward. It lays out 10 core pillars, things like security guarantees, tribunals for war crimes, and the complete restoration of its territory. But here's the problem. In practice, achieving any one of these goals runs directly into the core strategic interests of the United States, Russia, and even key European powers.
This really lays out the central friction perfectly. Ukraine, for obvious reasons, wants hard, permanent, legally binding guarantees. The United States, however, has historically preferred strategic flexibility. It avoids being locked into automatic military commitments. Europe's number one priority is stability on the continent, which sometimes means compromising on a perfect resolution. And Russia, of course, has no interest in these terms. It's looking to maintain leverage. This fundamental mismatch is really where the crisis begins.
As you can imagine, this mismatch is forcing a very difficult and very real conversation inside Washington. The peace plan isn't just a document about foreign policy. Its implications are forcing the United States to confront a major strategic dilemma of its own.
And that dilemma is essentially a three-way balancing act. The United States is constantly trying to juggle three competing goals. The first is to support Ukraine. The second is to avoid a direct and potentially catastrophic escalation with Russia. And the third is to protect its own long-term military readiness for other potential conflicts around the globe. These three goals don't always align. In fact, they often pull in completely different directions.
And this isn't some abstract theoretical problem. It has very real, very tangible consequences. Public reports from the Pentagon have made it clear. The prolonged conflict is putting a real strain on U.S. military stockpiles. It's affecting production lines and even delaying schedules for modernizing America's own armed forces. The need to support Ukraine is constantly being weighed against the need for readiness elsewhere.
Of course, we have to zoom out, because Ukraine's peace plan doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's a single piece on a vast global chessboard, where every major power is playing its own game, for its own strategic advantage.
This table really breaks down those competing interests. The U.S. is focused on stability and managing risk. Russia views the entire plan as a strategic threat and rejects it outright. China is playing the role of a neutral mediator, trying to build its global influence while still supporting Russia. And Europe, well, it supports the plan, but with the conflict on its own doorstep, its overriding priority is regional stability. The crucial takeaway here is that the one ingredient you absolutely need for any peace process, alignment, is the one thing that's completely missing from this equation. And all of this diplomatic pressure is being massively amplified by the reality on the ground. The conflict is now widely seen as being in a phase of stalemate, a point where neither side has the ability to deliver a decisive knockout blow. And it's that military reality that, however reluctantly, forces everyone back to the negotiating table and puts the focus squarely back on the peace plan. So, given all this complexity, we come to the most difficult question. What happens now? If the plan continues to stall, what are the potential paths forward? And what are the long-term consequences for global security?
Broadly speaking, we can see four main scenarios emerging. The first is a continued stalemate, where both sides just dig in for a long, grinding conflict. The second is a modification of the peace plan, where some goals are prioritized over others. The third is a major Russian escalation, which would completely change the calculus of Western support. And the fourth is a decisive shift in momentum for Ukraine on the battlefield, which would greatly strengthen its negotiating position. Each of these scenarios would dramatically reshape the strategic map.
But there's another way to look at all of this friction. Perhaps it's not a sign of failure at all. Perhaps what we're witnessing is a massive transition, a shift away from fast, reactive support for a crisis and toward a much slower, more structural strategy. The goal may no longer be just to manage a crisis, but to build a new, durable, long-term security architecture for all of Europe. And this friction we're seeing is a necessary, if difficult, part of that process.
And that leaves us with one final, and I think crucial question. When historians look back at this period, they may not focus on the individual battles. They may focus on this very moment, this convergence of diplomacy, military reality, and global power politics. So the question is this: is this crisis not the end of a negotiation, but the difficult, painful beginning of an entirely new security structure for the European continent?